The Stepford Wives is a 1975 suburban horror film directed by Brian Forbes, based on the novel by Ira Levin. Like other films in the genre, like the classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers or the more recent Get Out, it deals with themes of depersonalization in a seemingly unthreatening setting. In this case, a small upper-middle-class town in Connecticut, where a group of wealthy local men are replacing their wives with submissive, empty-headed androids. The book by Ira Levin and the film were intended as a darkly satirical look at the male backlash against the feminist movement of the 1970s. But this take wasn't necessarily seen for what it was at the time, or appreciated. Responses to the film on its arrival were lukewarm to outright hostile, with feminists of the era pointing out it was regressive and its depiction of women simplistic. It has nonetheless developed a cult following over the years and today can be appreciated as an entertaining social artifact of that period, which is not to say that it doesn't still contain some relevant social truths. In discussing what The Stepford Wives is actually about, it's important to disambiguate the film from lingering misconceptions about it, which often frame any discussion of its content. The same misconceptions that informed the Dumpster Fire remake from 2004. First, it is not a comedy, though it does have some comic or campy moments in it, some of which weren't necessarily intentional, and though there is obvious satirical irony in its ideas, the film plays the material seriously. Just because the premise may seem absurd at first does not diminish the distinct horror of its final act. As Hitchcock famously pointed out, horror is often a joke being told dead seriously. Second, and perhaps more important, though it is a film with a female protagonist that focuses on female characters, it is not really a film about women, or feminism, or a diatribe against the virtues of being a housewife. What The Stepford Wives is an allegory about misogyny and male power. I'm not saying the film has nothing to do with women, merely that it's not a very deep piece of writing, and that extrapolating on the cultural implications of what it presents is probably going to be more rewarding than trying to analyze its characters, who are, for the most part, drawn in very broad soap opera level terms. It's this lightweight dramatic veneer that I think often obscures the truth it speaks about how men disempower women as a social institution. In this respect, the most important symbol in the film is that of the Men's Association, a dark mansion behind a black iron gate that all the powerful local men belong to, but is forbidden to the women. All the scenes in The Stepford Wives that feature the association members invariably show not just casual forms of misogyny, but violations of a woman's personal space as a recurring motif. In an early scene, Joanna sees her neighbor grope his wife in broad daylight as a precursor to sex. On the surface, it shows the negation of consent, which is often talked about. But it's the fact that it's happening where anyone can see it that shows the degree of comfort the men have with misogyny. That this is something that's been normalized by the men in Stepford. In the scene where the association members visit the Eberhards to have a business meeting, Joanna, the only woman in the room, is conspicuously subject to the male gaze while her comments are ignored, and all the time she's being sketched by one of the members. We soon realize this visit is not about business at all, but about sizing up Joanna. As soon as she leaves the room to check on the children, all conversation abruptly stops as the artist shows the designs to the other men, notably the chairman known as Diz, who we know worked at Disneyland, with the inference that his specialty was animatronics. The next time we see the men gathered at the Eberhards is more ambiguous and unsettling, as Walter brings them into the couple's bedroom, where the men seem to be surveying the room's details. While they are not shown doing more obvious things like photographing the room or taking measurements, what's important here thematically is that Walter has allowed the men into the couple's, and more importantly, Joanna's most private personal space. And again, the mood of the scene is one of silent judgment. This is, of course, for the purposes of raising tension. If at any point in the film the men were shown openly speaking about replacing their wives with robots, it would instantly turn into a farce. It's the silence that makes it work, as what's unsaid grows and festers in the background of the film's otherwise urbane dialogue. When Joanna is finally confronted by her android replacement, she finds it in a disturbing mock-up of her bedroom in a disused spare room in the Men's Association, along with her missing dog. The implication is clear. Joanna's double has been tested and trained for her wifely duties in this set piece. A more disturbing implication here is that it would logically be the men of the association doing the training, which would answer the question of what it is the men do at the association every night. The final theft of her identity as Joanna's idealized doppelganger murders her. All these representations underline the fact that misogyny or sexism, like any other ism, is a group behavior, and that men's associations in any form have always been a vehicle for it. And this connects to the question of conformity. We ask ourselves, why does Walter want to replace Joanna? The answer again has little to do with women and everything to do with power. Walter wants to be inside the local power structure, which is the Men's Association. Having access to those levers of power is ultimately more important to him than his wife's needs, emotional or otherwise. It's important to understand the context of the era this film was coming from, specifically with regard to the Watergate scandal. After the bitter societal divisions of the 50s and the explosive unrest of the 60s, the corrupt fall of Nixon wasn't just seen as a criminal abuse of power. For the younger generation, it was a clear confirmation that their suspicions about the white male establishment were correct. It was a time where it felt like the structure of American society could implode at any moment. The grinning business suit-wearing men of the Stepford Men's Association are just as much a symbol of the societal rot at the time as the android wives are a symbol of female repression. But we tend to remember the androids more. Diving a little further into that decade, I think a strong case can also be made that much of the film's subtext could have a lot to do with the rampant overprescription of tranquilizers for women that was going on in the 70s, and that this phenomena was also based in cultural assumptions that were sexist. The final message of the Stepford Wives is that there's no room for feminism or liberated women within a white male hierarchy. It's a message that liberal-minded people may have blanched at in the mid-70s, but that one can hardly fail to miss in the present-day posturing of retrogressive male power movements, all beholden to an ideology that power is something you take from the person below you, not something you create by the act of sharing. It's a view that's even more archaic now than it was in 1975, and why Stepford Wives, perhaps unfortunately, is still relevant as social commentary. There are, of course, many other things that could be analyzed in this film and other ways to interpret it, but these were the points in the present day that I find most significant in hindsight, and the ones I think most often missed when the film is discussed. And that's why this is called The Divergent View. This is Random Rob. Thanks for watching.